I often find that most supporters of the West Memphis Three have gotten the bulk of their information on the case from the documentaries. Though the films are highly entertaining and convincing, they can be misleading and dishonest. Anyone who takes the time to actually look at the case files and transcripts will see a very different picture than the one painted by the documentaries. There are a few major points that make me doubt the West Memphis Three's innocence. Lies, lies, lies. Damien in particular has an ever-evolving story about the day of the crime and surrounding events. A major one being the times in which the phone calls with Holly, Jennifer, and Heather occurred on May 5th, 1993. Damien and his defense would use the phone calls as an alibi for the time when the murders are thought to have taken place. However, the girls made statements contradicting Damien's story about the various times they spoke on the day of the murders. Jennifer and Holly said they spoke with Damien and Jason around 4 or 5 p.m. for about 30 minutes before the boys said for the girls to call them back later because they, quote, were going somewhere. Jennifer tried to call Damien later that night around 8 to 8:30 p.m. and his grandmother answered the phone telling her to call back later because Damien was not home. Jennifer eventually was able to get a hold of Damien around 10 p.m. This is also corroborated by Heather, who stated she was unable to get a hold of Damien until around 10:30 p.m. as well. Jennifer also stated that when she asked Damien where he was when she first called, he said that Jason's mom had taken them driving around somewhere. Although records show that Jason's mom was at work that day and couldn't have taken them anywhere during this time. If the girls' statements are true, it would give Damien time to commit the murders and be home in time for the 10 to 10:30 p.m. phone calls. However, if Damien's statement is true, it would mean that he wasn't out visiting with his family at the Sanders house, but rather out driving around with Jason and his mother, thus disproving the second alibi put forth by Bob Ruffin the Truth and Justice podcast. That being that Damien couldn't have committed the murders because he was visiting the Sanders with his families when the murders occurred and was back home for the phone calls around 7 to 7:30 p.m. Either way, Damien is lying. Another lie told by Damien was that he had never been to Robin Hood Hills or have any knowledge of it. This was determined to be a lie. He lived in Mayfair Apartments at one point, which was just a stone's throw away from the murder scene. In Exhibit 500 on page 221, when asked to describe himself when he got angry, he answered, "Go to room or woods." It was also discovered when Damien took the stand in court that he would use Robin Hood Hills as a shortcut to and from Jason Baldwin's trailer on a regular basis. In addition, he was spotted leaving the crime scene on the night of the murder by multiple witnesses known as the Hollingsworth family. They claimed to have seen Damien and another person they believed to be his girlfriend, Dominique, walking westward about 200 yards from the murder scene. The direction Damien was spotted walking towards was also happened to be the direction and the path to Lakeshore Trailer Park in which Jason Baldwin lived. The prosecutor would later claim that the Hollingsworth family confused Dominique for Jason due to their similar build and appearance. This was later substantiated by Jesse Miskelly's confession, in which he claimed to receive a phone call from Jason later on that night after the murders had occurred, and that Damien could be heard in the background saying, quote, "We done it, what if someone saw us," unquote. The Hollingsworth family statement matches Jesse's confession by placing Damien at Jason's home after he was spotted heading in that direction on the night of the murders. More weight is added to these claims when you factor in that Narlene Hollingsworth reported her sighting of Damien and another person near the crime scene covered in mud on May 9th. This was 4 days after the murders and a month before Jesse's confession. Jesse Miskelly's multiple confessions. False confessions happen. I would imagine someone young with a low IQ would be especially vulnerable to this. This does not escape me. However, I don't believe this to be the case with Jesse. Jesse's first confession is riddled with inconsistencies, most notably the time and certain details of the crime. However, the overall premise remains the same, not only in his first, but second, third, even fourth confession. That premise being that himself, Damien, and Jason murdered the 3 young boys on May 5th, 1993. Jesse claims that the inconsistencies of his first confession was his attempt to throw the cops off and minimize his involvement. Guilty people with remorse will often try to distance themselves and minimize their wrongdoing. False confessions may happen, but they do not continue to happen over multiple times over multiple months, some of which happen under no duress and even under protest from his own attorney begging him to remain silent, in which Jesse's only response to his attorney Dan Stidham's protest was, quote, "I want something done about this." I believe Jesse felt guilt, anger, and remorse for his involvement. Low cognitive intelligence does not necessarily mean low emotional intelligence. In the following weeks after the murders took place, Jesse Sr.'s girlfriend described Jesse Jr. having strange, unexplained crying fits and nightmares. More corroborated details from the murder began to leak out during his continued confessions that would only be known to the killers and law enforcement, such as correctly identifying that Christopher Byers was the victim who had his genital area cut. Another detail was that he witnessed Damien and Jason pull two of the boys' pants off from the waist down without unbuttoning or unzipping, and that the jeans came off inside out. Subsequently, that's how two of the jeans were found. He also admitted to chasing, catching, and holding Michael Moore until Jason and Damien caught up with him after Michael Moore tried to run off in an attempt to escape. Michael Moore's body was eventually discovered a short distance away from Christopher and Stevie's bodies. Jesse also stated the day of the murders that he, Damien, and Jason were drunk. Jesse had gotten a bottle of Evans Williams whiskey from Vicky Hutchinson, and that Damien and Jason were drinking beer. He told prosecutors and his attorney about the overpass where he had discarded the bottle on his way home after the murders. That's exactly where they found it. To be clear, they don't describe finding multiple Evans Williams bottles, but only the one. Vicky Hutchinson also confirmed buying the Evans Williams whiskey for Jesse on the days preceding the murders. During a scene in the documentary Paradise Lost, Damien's attorney asked him, "If you get out of here, are you buying the beer?" In which Damien responds by nodding his head yes and chuckling while saying, quote, "Whiskey, no more beer."
If you get out of here, you gonna buy the beer?
The whiskey. No beer.
Although not direct physical evidence, it's hard to believe that all these things are merely coincidences. Jason Baldwin failed to provide an alibi at the time of his arrest, nor did he present one during trial. Jason also was the only one of the three accused that refused to take a polygraph test. Today we know that the polygraph tests are unreliable and do not think it odd for an accused to avoid taking a test, as it could result in a false positive. However, back in 1993, this was not widely known. The fact he refused to take a polygraph test back in 1993 only added to law enforcement's suspicion. On May 9, 1993, Jason gave a joint account with Damien and Dominique of their activities on the day of the murders. They claimed to be together while Jason mowed his uncle's lawn and later were picked up by Damien's father at a laundromat around 6 p.m. After which Damien's father dropped Jason and Dominique off at Lakeshore, then drove home. In 2008, at his Rule 37 hearing, Jason gave a different version of the story. In this version, after Jason finished mowing his uncle's lawn, he noticed Damien and Dominique had gone. Ken Watkins was now present and relayed the message that Damien and Dominique had left to call Damien's mother. Together with Ken, Jason walked to Walmart, where they ran into an Asian guy named Kim and played the arcade game Street Fighter. Jason then describes going home on his own. When he arrived home, Dennis Dink Dent was home. Then he went to his friend Adam Phillips' home to purchase a cassette tape. Jason then says he returned home and spoke to his girlfriend Heather and friends Holly and Jennifer on the phone for the rest of the evening. The version of the story has many problems, starting with Kim, who Jason refers to as the Asian guy at Walmart. He has never been found or come forward. As for Ken Watkins, he offers a different story, claiming that Jason, Damien, and Dominique all played video games together at Jason Baldwin's trailer during this time. Dennis Dink Dent, Jason's mother's boyfriend, claims to have seen Jason when he got home, but not until 9 or 9:30 p.m. Adam Phillip also says he didn't sell the cassette tape to Jason until sometime after 8 or 9 p.m. None of these interactions give Jason an alibi for the time of the murders. As for the phone calls, during the initial statements, all three girls, Heather, Jennifer, and Holly, denied speaking to Jason on the night of May 5th. Then there's Jason's muddy boots with brand new shoelaces. Police collected a pair of muddy boots with new laces from Baldwin's trailer home. Police also retrieved the victim's shoe with the lace still intact at the crime scene. Victims Stevie and Christopher were bound with their own shoelaces. Michael Moore, on the other hand, was tied with a long black shoelace that had been cut in half. The lace was long enough to be cut in half and be used to bind all four of his limbs, suggesting the shoelace did not come from a child's shoe, but rather an adult-sized shoe. The fact that the lace had been cut also suggests that there was a knife involved. Finally, Damien's mental illness cannot be underrated. Read through Exhibit 500 of Damien's professional pen psychological profile that describes a truly troubled and tortured mind. He exhibited all the classic red flags of a dangerous mind, including violence to animals, clinical depression, manic behavior, delusions of grandeur, and homicidal thoughts. He was mentally ill and on mind-altering medication, especially knowing what we know now about the effects of these types of medications and the effects it can have on the brain. His use of psychotropic medication and alcohol could be enough to cause a serious lapse in judgment or a loss of sense of reality. He met with a psychiatrist the day of the murders, and his mom went to refill his prescription. Was he off his meds? And if so, for how long? Or was he on his meds and mixing them with alcohol and other substances? These are all things to take into consideration, in my humble opinion. The West Memphis 3 were viable suspects. They weren't only targeted for being weird, wearing black, and listening to heavy metal. All these attributes were pretty common back in 1993. West Memphis was not solely a strictly religious town. There was plenty of gambling, drugs, alcohol, and counterculture communities. West Memphis had the same problems that plagued other small cities. The satanic panic narrative has been pushed since the Paradise Lost documentaries. In reality, it was suspicious behavior, lack of alibis, and the confession that brought law enforcement to put them at the top of the list. The fact that they were social outcasts was just the cherry on top. I don't know whether they are guilty or innocent, but people need to stop taking what these podcasts and documentaries are spinning as gospel.